Hey, 12s, we're going to do now the example question 2 of fast forward scanning and backward scanning. In this activity here, we've got a network. We can see there, activity network there. It says, consider the section of this activity network shown in the diagram below. What is the duration of activity A? So again, you can look at the activity A and say, well, it starts off, earliest start time at this point is 6. So whatever this duration of A is, it is predicted to finish by 9. Okay, so we can say that the duration clearly, and you can double check with the latest start time as well. 9 to 6 is also 3. So we can say that safely that the duration has to be then 3. Okay. Through forward scanning. And then similarly, let's now look at the critical, it says here, what is the critical path through this section of the activity network? Well, in this activity network, the critical path is where you don't have a float time, or at least it is very important that it gets done. So what you can see here is that the earliest start time is 6, right? But notice that if you go down this pathway, it seems that it only needs 2 to get there. Seems like it's only 2 to get there, and then 8 to go here. It looks like it's a 7, right? Looks is a key word. And up here, it looks like 6 to 9 is 3, and then from here 9 to 15 looks like 6. Okay, but if you add them all together, so you can see that 6 plus 3 gives you 9, and then 9 plus 6 should give you 15, okay? And then over here, you can see that 6 plus 2 gives you 8, 8 plus 7 apparently gives you 15 as well. But can you see that if you go backward scanning, there's a bit of a change here. So from 15 to 9, can you see that this is also still 6? So it means that duration must be 6 there. But then if you look over here, duration is 15 take away 3, which is 2. And then from 13 to 6 here, 13 take away to get back to 6, you can see that the 18 minus 6 will, 13 minus 6 gives you 7. So there's a discrepancy here. And that's likely due to the fact that only one of them is only being accounted for. And so this is how you would want to be calculating it. You would say that clearly the critical pathway through this section, clearly it has to be 6, 6 to 9, 9 to 15. So AC is the critical pathway. Okay, so A to C is a critical pathway. That's where all the critical activities, at least A, has to be done. Earliest start time is 6 and latest start time is 6. Earliest start time for C is 9 and latest start time is 9. So there's no room to wiggle. Whereas it looks like on the bottom, B and D seem to have a some wiggle time here. And this is where it's interesting, because remember when you're doing forward scanning, that you take the largest values. So it looks like 3 and 6 is definite. So that means 9 plus 6, it had to be 15 already. This spot here had to be 15, but it doesn't necessarily mean that this had to add up to 15. Does that make sense? So we're assuming it's 7, but it's likely that it's 15 backwards tracking. This had to be 2. Okay, but then that would imply that 8 plus 2 should have gave me 10. So it only takes 10 minutes to get to finish. And they'll finish a bit early there. They got another 5 minutes float time to wait for. So you can see that in D, activity D, you had a start time of 8. Okay, and with the start time of 8, if I added 2 to it, I'd finish early at 10. But you know, the latest start time I would then have is 13. See, 13, add the extra 2, that makes sense that then I finish at exactly 15. So I got a float time. What's the float time? It's from 8 to 13. There's a float time of 5. There's 5 minutes in between them that you can kind of play around there. So when you answer this question, you need to be checking the backwards and forward scanning as you're going through them, just to make sure that you're not getting confused as which one is which. And because of that, you can already see if this was 2, a plus 2 is 10. Out of 2, obviously 15 then takes the cake. You need minimum of 15. That's why you don't see this 10. And that's why it feels like D was 7, but it's not. Clearly D is 2. Okay, and then similarly, you can also follow this process backwards. And you can say, well, why is this 6 again? Remember, you're picking the smallest value. We know that from 6 to come to 8, that clearly has to be an additional of 2. But that means if you go backwards, 13 minus 2 should have been 11. You see, it should have been 11, but the latest start time that A could, in order to complete all of this, it was 6 because that was the smallest value. From 9 take away 3, we knew that 6 had to be the smallest value, which is why in the latest starting time, it's 6 and they didn't account for the 11. So you don't see that 11 there. Okay, so just answering that already, I can already say that B has to be 2 through forward scanning. Okay. So if that is the duration, now let's go back to the question. C says, what is the float time of activity B? Well, activity B, as you can see there, remember, if we worked it out, it could have started at 11. That's the latest start time. Or we knew that it could start at 6. So 6 add the 2 gives you 8, right? And 11 plus 2 gives you 13. So what is the float time? Well, between 6 and 11, clearly the float time for B is 11 minus 6, which is 5. Okay, so that's what I'm trying to get your head around, just so that you understand what you're doing there. But the answer there would be 5. That's how you would find out the float time for B. So even though they don't write it technically, there should be another box here where the starting time for B was 6, and the latest start time for it can be calculated. If you know 6 to 8 is an extra 2, well then 13 minus 2 gives you 11. So this is the float time. B doesn't have to start at 6. B can start at 11 and still get to this point at 13, and 13 plus 2 still makes it on time at 15. Does that make sense? Okay, so answering the question, what is the float time of activity B? Well, activity B has a float time of 11 minus 6, which is 5. Okay, and then what is the activity, the latest time that activity D can start? Well, the latest time that activity D can start is right here. This is activity D. So activity D, latest time is clearly 13. So 13 is the latest time for activity D. Okay, so they don't have to start at 8, because 8 plus the 2 gives you 10. They can start at 13 and still finish at 15 on time. Okay, so we know that the latest time for D is at 13. And what is the duration of activity D? Well, we happen to calculate it already. That is clearly 2. Okay, and that's how I would go about it. But hopefully, as I'm describing it, you're starting to get the feel of it. I'm going to do the other questions as well and try to run through it before I go through solutions, and that way you learn a bit better with, EST, LST, duration, float time, and critical path. Okay.